James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosch. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
All right, folks. The Away Team podcast is back. We finally got a reprieve from playoff basketball.
Yeah, I mean, what better time to talk about next season when we don't even know if this season is going to conclude?
Yeah,
or
right?
This might be it.
I mean, it's going to be really interesting because, you know, if you're the players protesting, wouldn't you want it to be more than one night? That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, some people are talking about going home. If one team forfeits, it would be bad sportsmanship for the other teams to just be like, all right, sick, I move on to the next round automatically. I mean, the Magic, you know they really wanted to do that when the Bucks didn't come out. They're like, hey, a win's a win. But their better sides came out, and they agreed to also boycott the game.
They were out there shooting, though. They were taking warm-up shots and stuff while the Bucks were still in the locker room discussing the boycott.
I mean, they didn't get the memo on time, and like...
Yeah, Vucevic and Fournier were like,
yeah.
Is there a problem in the U.S.?
Yeah, they have no idea. They don't know what's going on. They're just there to hoop.
But yeah, so today we thought we could talk about some teams that aren't in the bubble. And then maybe if we have time, we're going to hit the coaching fires and try to talk about which coaches might make the most sense to replace the coaches that were fired in the last week or so. First off, though, let's get our draft lottery reactions. We still haven't reacted to the draft lottery. I know it was last Thursday, right?
Something like that. Yeah, I think it was last Thursday.
Yeah, so we figured we'd do that right now. And we put together 5 or so winners and losers of the draft. Really, it's more, I think, the most important narratives for us. But to start, we've got the number 1 winner, which has to be the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah, you finally got one, guys. It took a long time. I think they had some of the worst luck in the lottery in their entire existence, so... It's cool that they finally, I guess, have it paid out. Knowing, well, I guess they have new management, so maybe they'll be better at drafting. If it was still the old management, I don't think I would be that optimistic.
Yeah, the new management, I think the jury's still out on whether or not they have a good drafting record. They drafted Jarrett Culver last year, and he struggled a lot, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Watching him, it seemed like he was coming together a little bit at the end of the year, but I'd say, yeah, we just can't be certain about what his potential is so far.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to judge a rookie when they're just playing terribly. You know, there's plenty of rookies that started off with terrible seasons and they end up turning into all-stars. I'm pretty sure Kemba Walker had a pretty bad first season. Jarrett Culver, you know, shooting under 30% from 3. Not great. Looks a little lost out there sometimes. He got Rondo faked by Emmanuel Mudiay. Was probably the highlight of his rookie year. But, you know, there's a lot of time for him to develop.
Yeah, and unfortunately that Rondo fake plays like every single commercial break.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, can we just talk about the NBA League Pass, like, advertisements and how annoying they are and so loud and just, like, the same thing over and over. And they're still advertising, like, the first game of the playoffs on Game 5. Come on.
It's just a constant Emmanuel Mudiay commercial.
I mean, he needs it, man. He needs it.
But yeah, so actually pretty fortunate timing for Minnesota to be getting this pick. As everyone probably knows, during the season, they made the D'Angelo Russell trade and the Malik Beasley, Juancho Hernan-Gomez trades. So they were sort of solidifying their future, and I think it's just very fortunate for them to have this number 1 pick on top of these new pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have a lot of pieces that they still need. I'm sure they could really use someone to shore up the defensive side. But, you know, looking at the top prospects in this class, it's hard to say that there is a good choice in that regard. I was thinking maybe, get like Wiseman and then move Karl Anthony Towns to the 4, you know, kind of how they do with like Kristaps and some Dallas lineups. But if Karl Anthony Towns is having trouble guarding slow-footed 5s, I can only imagine how he's going to get cooked by dudes that are a little bit faster.
Yeah, and also I don't think Wiseman predicts as a plus on defense. I think he's more of a scorer, ball-handling big. That's just what I've seen so far. I haven't delved into the prospects in any great depth yet, but I think it's an interesting draft for them to have the number 1 pick because it seems like, you mentioned the defense. They really need good defenders. And there aren't a lot of good defenders at the top of the draft, and there aren't a lot of wings, which I think is their position of real need at this point.
Yeah, I mean, they need a wing, so do they go for the Israeli guy, Denny Avdia? When they have the number 1 pick, they can pick whoever they want. Do they pick this prospect who is seen as slightly inferior to the guys at the top, or do they just go for the best player available? I mean, I think history says go for the best player available and figure out your wing depth or whatever later. So, who is the best player available? A lot of people are coming around to Anthony Edwards. Problem is they already have D'Angelo Russell, so they need a guy who's like kind of an inefficient volume scorer. I don't know.
I know this has already been mentioned on other pods, but the fact that Anthony Edwards, when asked about his college experience, said it taught me how to have bad games because I had a lot of bad games is maybe the best interview question I've ever heard. And the best answer, of course.
You listen to that and you have so much confidence in this guy. And the Timberwolves will be perfect for him.
Yeah, I mean, the Timberwolves were maybe the masters of having bad games last year. So to get another good bad game haver could be an important asset for them.
Yeah, you were saying that LaMelo might be a good fit for them. I mean, my issue is that the development staff on the Timberwolves doesn't really give me that much hope that they would be able to iron out his kinks that quickly. And it might just lead the league to assume that he's a bust. The kid's obviously very skilled, but those shooting splits are absolutely horrible. I don't know if I've seen shooting splits that bad for a guy who's considered a top 3 prospect.
Look, any of these number 1 pick prospects in this draft are going to have shooting issues. Anthony Edwards, bad shooter. LaMelo Ball, bad shooter. Cole Anthony, bad shooter, although he's usually slotted quite a bit down from those other 2. And I think that makes a pairing with D'Angelo Russell a bit tricky. Russell has a jump shot, but it's not, I wouldn't say he's a knockdown.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just positionally, it's very difficult to imagine the backcourt of the Timberwolves with LaMelo Ball and D'Angelo Russell at the 2. It's just a very weird pairing. I do like the idea, though, of LaMelo Ball as somebody who can initiate the offense better than D'Angelo Russell, who's a bit quicker, uncanny passer. I mean, just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So those were sort of the assets that I thought he had that the Wolves could use. And of course, just 6'7" size for a point guard is hard to beat.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see it. I know Kat and D'Lo are a few years older, so they will be introducing someone who is on a slightly different timeline. And I think that is worth noting because if you're the Timberwolves, you really have to decide what are you going to do. Are you going to just be bad again while you integrate another rookie into your system? Whatever that system is, I don't know. Ryan Saunders can answer that question. But, or do you choose a guy with a little bit more experience that will slot right in? The problem is there's just, I don't think that many of those guys in the top of the draft class this year. Like Tyrese Haliburton is probably the best option you have on that end. But again, with the number 1 pick, you're kind of in a dilemma. You have to pay this guy more money than anyone else has to pay their draft pick.
Yeah.
It is a blessing and a curse, especially in a draft class like this. Although I do think that all the prognosticators that are saying, oh, this draft class is terrible, it's going to be historically bad, they don't know shit.
Yeah.
They don't know shit. This might be a great draft class. Like, they were saying that Steph Curry's draft class was bad because all of the best picks had major questions about their game. And then you look at that, and you have, 10 players that are awesome from it.
Yeah, of course. And, I mean, the big draft that everyone always points to when they talk about drafts that during the pre-draft process people thought were weak drafts is the Giannis draft, right? 2013, I think?
I think so.
Yeah, 2013 draft. You've got Anthony Bennett, number 1, who's
really
maybe the
amazing.
best player of all time. The GOAT. But in that draft, you've got Oladipo, you've got Giannis, you've got CJ McCollum, you've got Rudy Gobert.
The actual GOAT, Trey Burke.
Trey Burke, of course. A lot of good players.
Drafted by Minnesota, Trey Burke.
Oh my god, I forgot he was. But, alright, let's move on to Golden State. Which, I mean, you've got to say we're de facto winners and that they stayed in the top 3. They had the worst record, but were tied for the number 1 odds with Minnesota and Cleveland. What do you think about this? I think all indications are that they're just going to trade this pick, right?
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that's what they did. I mean, what do? Do you go in to the draft and try to pick this kid up that will provide a bridge into the next era once Steph and Dre and Clay start retiring? Because that's not that long from now. They're in their early 30s at this point. They could definitely continue for another 5 years maybe, but their production's probably going to decline pretty consistently over that time. So that's one factor. But the other factor is you should maximize the championship window when you still have these guys that are so talented. And what better way to do that than to bring in another very good player using that draft pick? I don't know who they would be targeting, though.
That's the thing. I think it's just a little bit early for us to be pontificating on which players are going to be available during the draft, which is around the corner. But, early indications, like there's turmoil in Indiana with Victor Oladipo. I think a lot of the Philly guys are going to be available, especially Tobias Harris. If you want him, he's for sale.
Nobody wants him.
But, would you say no to the number 2 pick in Andrew Wiggins for Tobias Harris?
Yeah, that's worth considering.
I'm just saying, there are guys out there that could upgrade the Golden State roster. I'm not sure if that might be an undersell for the number 2 pick.
They could throw in Zaire Smith. I hear his name come up every single time that there's like a Philly trade rumor, and it's like, that guy's never going to play. He's out of the league already. Like, it's not a trade asset.
Poison with sesame oil.
It's too bad.
So the next winners we had were, of course, Charlotte and Chicago, which we're going to put together because they both moved up drastically. Chicago moved up to number 4 from the 7th best odds, and Charlotte moved up to number 3 from the 8th best odds. Charlotte hadn't moved up in the draft for 21 years, which is pretty insane. And they had some really, really unlucky opportunities, like in 2012 when they tanked the entire year to get Anthony Davis, and they ended up with the number 2 pick and drafted Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. That's like a franchise-shattering decision.
It's tough. That's very, very tough.
So, yeah, what did you think? What were your initial reactions?
It's good. It's good for Chicago. It seems like they're really just stripping off the paint and putting on a new coat this year. They'll have a great opportunity to do so. They got rid of the toxicity of their previous management and coaching staff, which we'll definitely go into later. But they have a lot of pieces they need, right? I don't know if I would feel confident saying that anyone that they have right now is the solution for them. I think a lot of people are saying that they should draft a new ball handler, right? And some people are like, oh, well, last year they drafted Kobe White. I think it's become pretty clear over the course of the year, seeing how Kobe White plays, that he is probably more of like microwave bench scorer that can come in, get hot really fast and get you some points than a guy that's going to be running your offense. Yeah. So this is actually a really good draft for them to do that because there are so many promising guard prospects. And the fact that they won't have to play under Jim Boylen for their first year is also going to be a benefit for them.
Yeah, of course.
For Charlotte, I think the answer to their question is going to be a little bit more complicated because they have so many positional needs. Like, at least Chicago has, like, Zach LaVine, who's pretty good, and Lauri Markkanen has potential, I guess. We'll see how he plays under a coach other than Boylen, because that has not been good for him. But Charlotte, like, I don't know, Devontae Graham, Terry Rozier exceeded expectations, whatever that means. I don't really see anyone on that roster that is going to be the piece that they need.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because these two teams are both at very different points in their rebuilds. Charlotte is more or less like just starting their rebuild. They don't really have a lot of high lottery talent that has really panned out. So it's really fortunate for them. Also, another interesting thing about them is that they are one of the only teams in the league that really needs a center. And the initial reactions to the lottery were that it pretty much locks in James Wiseman at number 3, which I can't really disagree with. It would make a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, who's their starting center? Like Zeller?
I think Cody Zeller started most of the year. But Chicago, on the other hand, they have a lot of young talent. And they're almost at a point where they have gotten so many high draft picks and traded for so many young players that you almost think this could be an opportunity to trade out of the number 4 pick plus some of their young talent to get somebody that's a little more established. I think they're an interesting trade team too.
I don't know if I would put them at that stage yet. I still think that they have to pad their roster a little bit. The thing is, Otto Porter is a guy that I think, forgetting about, injuries or anything like that, is a guy that a lot of teams would like to have, in theory. Problem is his contract is enormous. Like more than $25 million.
I think it's like 28.
It's ridiculous. I mean, if they could figure out a way to get anything of value back for him and then just go all young. I don't know if Thaddeus Young is on contract through next year, but maybe get something. I don't know.
Is that what you meant by all young?
Yeah, exactly. No, we need a team of 15 Thaddeus Youngs. Thaddeus Young coming off the bench, Thaddeus Young starting at center. No, but if I had to bet, I would guess that they would hold on to the pick because I think that they still do want that guy that can electrify the team. Zach LaVine is obviously a very exciting player to watch. He's got defensive issues, of course. He's had issues with the coach, but who hasn't? But I don't see them as having as solid of a base, maybe, to actually be like 1 or 2 guys away from making the playoffs even.
To me, they've got a starting 5 of all lottery picks in the last 5-6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then they've also got lottery picks coming off the bench, people like Chris Dunn, Kobe White. So it's sort of like they have all of this young talent that needs to play, right? And at a certain point, you hit a breaking point where you just have to trade people in order to satisfy minutes.
That's for sure. I just wonder, so Chris Dunn is going to be free agent this coming off season. So that's not even... Restricted is true. So if they did some kind of sign and trade for him, maybe, I think that he's a piece that they're not making the full use out of. And I think a lot of teams would really like a guard like that. I don't know if Kobe White has that much value on the trade market yet, honestly.
I mean, that's the difficulty with constructing any Chicago trade is all of their young players have had just very weird seasons.
Yeah.
Whether it's injuries, Larry Markkinen, he's played very inconsistently. Wendell Carter has looked good at times. He's looked really bad at times. He's been injured at times.
Yeah.
So is Markkinen. It's just very hard to create a trade because, like you said, it's hard to value these players.
That's why, even if they do move some of those players next season, I don't think that they're going to do anything with the pick this year. I think that they might be enamored with a prospect and just really want him on the team. And I don't know if there's a ball handling player out there that's already in the league that would be worth the number 4 pick for the team that would trade them to Chicago. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you.
It's a big question. So those are our winners. Let's go to the losers. Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland's history is basically being losers, but in the NBA, they've actually had amazing lottery luck. So them dropping to 5 after having the second worst record, really, I don't feel that bad for them.
Yeah, maybe they just didn't get Dan Gilbert's son's luck because he wasn't there in person. But immediately after the draft lottery, all the talk was about how the Knicks dropped 2 slots, which, of course, you can talk about that. The Knicks are such a famous team. They're going to get all of the media hype.
Infamous, I think, is the word for the Knicks.
Sure. But Cleveland dropped even more slots. They had the second worst record, and they ended up with the number 5 pick, which is pretty brutal. So, yeah, I mean, they're a team that I think, other than the point guard position, is just very up in the air at every slot. Sort of like Minnesota, having that point guard position filled makes a lot of these top prospects sort of weird for them. It'll be really interesting to see what they do there. But, yeah, I'd say they are the biggest losers of the draft.
Yeah, and the other East teams that all dropped, so Atlanta, Detroit, and New York, they're also obviously losers, I guess to less of a degree than Cleveland. But, I mean, for New York in particular, having the 8th pick after, you can say that New York had, the 6th worst record in the league, but they just look like the worst team. I just don't feel like they have a path out. Let's see what the new coach, Thibodeau, does to them. It will be very interesting. I feel like there might be a mutiny at some point, but it's pretty shitty. especially, I mean, all these teams are rebuilding, right? They need all of the draft capital they can get. Like Detroit, they look hopeless too.
I mean, Detroit doesn't really have a single lottery pick. Kennard, I think, is the only... Oh, no. There is Sekou Doumbouya. I forgot about him, and he had a pretty bad rookie season, I thought.
Yeah, he had like a stretch of a few good games, but then he was getting DNPs later in the month, and it was just weird.
And also, I think he was one of the least experienced prospects in last year's draft. You know, he came out of the French league and was not actually playing many minutes for his team. So there's probably an element of fatigue with just playing a lot more minutes in games, and also of shock in terms of the difference in competition. I mean, it's really bad for Detroit. I think going into the lottery, they were really hoping to have a much higher pick than this.
I will say, though, with Detroit, they have a lot of one specific type of asset on their team that teams are looking for, and they have a ton of three-point sharpshooters. You look at their roster, they have 5 guys who shot 38% or more on threes on over 4 attempts a game. So not just guys who can shoot, but guys who can shoot with volume, and that's after they got rid of Markieff Morris and Reggie Jackson. They also have Derrick Rose. So they have all these things that are very tradable. They have a lot of guys that they can move and get something back. I know that one thing that freaked me out was I looked at the Sixers position in this draft. They have 5 picks. They have a ton of like second rounders. I mean, they could really use some three-point sharpshooters, you know? I feel like they would be more than willing to get rid of some of those second rounders and give them to Detroit. Detroit needs as much as it can get right now.
Yeah, and what's interesting is we've talked throughout the pod about the fact that so many of these teams don't need a point guard. Detroit really does.
Yeah.
So I could really see them moving up if they are infatuated with Edwards or with LaMelo Ball. That would actually make a lot of sense for them to move up, especially when I think the value of the number 1 pick or the number 2 pick or the number 3 pick might be atypically lower than previous drafts.
Definitely. I think they have enough things that they could do a multi-team trade to move up a little bit. I think that they could figure it out. Do you have anything more to say about these teams?
Not really. I mean, I think for Atlanta, you know, it kind of sucks, but it's not as bad for them as it is for Detroit and New York.
Yeah.
Because Atlanta's just further into their rebuild. They have a lot of young talent. So, I mean, I look for them to draft... Hell, I don't know who they're going to draft.
Halliburton, please.
I'm a big Halliburton fan.
Travis
He's
Schlenk,
my
if you're
favorite.
listening.
He's my favorite prospect in the draft, but we'll see. I think the Hawks are fine. Like I said, it sucks that they dropped a couple of spots, but it's not as bad as it is for other teams.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to New York doing the ultimate Knicks move and trading up to get James Wiseman when they already have Mitchell Robinson on their team. If that happens, I'm going to laugh so hard. And because it's the Knicks, I would not be surprised whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, they would say, look, we're going to play Wiseman at the 4. We don't have enough guys playing power forward, so we're going to shore up our power forward position.
They have a real shortage of those guys.
We'll trade Julius Randle to get Marcus Morris back.
Yeah, I mean, but Julius Randle, you know, that kid... He's got some spunk. I like the way he plays. That's what I imagine Dolan saying when he watches him fumble the ball while trying to like post someone up sloppily.
So good. Okay, and then just last, I wanted to talk about parity a little bit because I think it's an interesting draft lottery in terms of parity between the Western and Eastern Conference. Obviously, the top 2 picks are going to be Western Conference teams, and both teams, obviously the Warriors more than Minnesota, I think are going to be going into next season thinking that they have a real shot at making the playoffs. What do you think this means for the parity situation in the league? Do you think this bolsters the Western Conference even more than it has already been bolstered?
The thing is, in the Eastern Conference, pretty much all the shitty teams can delude themselves into believing that they're playoff locks too. You've seen that with the Knicks years and years. But I will say that it does suck for the top 2 picks, especially for one to go to Golden State when they've just come out of an extremely successful dynasty. But that's just how it works, right? I do think that the fact that this draft doesn't have a consensus top pick, and then you have 7 teams in a row from the Eastern Conference immediately following those 2 picks does make it a little bit more balanced. I don't think that the quality of the number 1 pick this year, it's not like the Zion and John Morant and everyone else draft of last year. Even though there were obviously some really good players later into the lottery and even past that, I think here it's going to be even more of that phenomenon.
Yeah, I think that the fact that all of the Eastern Conference teams are going to be slotted in after those 2 picks really helps. I mean, it would really suck if the Western Conference teams were like the top 5.
Yeah.
That would be awful. And historically, there's a lot of value in the 3 through 8 to 10 range.
Except for 7. 7 sucks all the time for some reason.
7 and 2 is surprisingly worse than 3, right? But yeah, I mean, it'll be really interesting. I think that, there could be a situation where a lot of the consensus top picks end up falling into that 3 through 10 range. So it'll be interesting to see where people end up.
You just know teams are going to be like, no, I'm going to go with this random guy that no one even heard of. I'm just going to take a flyer on him because this draft is such a crapshoot.
Yeah, if you have a bull situation, are you just going to show him in his living room for 2 hours?
We're cutting back to Cole Anthony sitting in his living room silently.
Oh, he's definitely going to be the guy to drop if there is one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not liking what I'm seeing from him, to be honest, and I wouldn't be surprised if teams felt the same.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with memoriams for the coaches that have been fired, and then a little bit of who should they hire next.
We'll see you after the break.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. We're back from our break, and now on to the thing that everyone's been waiting for, the coach memorial. But to start, let's start off on a good note. We just want to give props to Nick Nurse for winning Coach of the Year. Did a great job. Very well deserved. The Raptors lost Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green, replaced them with Rondé Hollis Jefferson and Stanley Johnson, and their net rating this year is the same. They actually had a higher win percentage. No arguing with that, really.
I just feel like Nick Nurse is able to get so much out of players that aren't expected to produce very much.
Yeah, the trash-ass players on the Raptors. Just say it. You can say it. No, seriously. No one expected this team to even have 50 wins this year, much less be competing for 60 wins, prorated.
His experience as assistant coach under Dwayne Casey, where he was really the guy in charge of developing a lot of the young players. Players like Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby.
Norman Powell.
I think that gave him a lot of insight into player development. And it seems like as a head coach, he's taken that one step further, right? You're seeing production out of players who had really lackluster starts to their career, like Rondé Hollis Jefferson. You're also seeing production from players like Terrence Davis that was undrafted.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just the defensive schemes are pretty magical. I think the offense is underrated, and the player development is on point. It's the trifecta of coaching.
Yeah, I mean, the Raptors organization is in a really good spot right now. I just hope that as a person that lives in Toronto, both of us, I think we both hope that the Raptors are able to hold on to him and Masai for as long as possible, because what they've done with this team in just a short amount of time is really remarkable.
Yeah, I agree.
No one expects a undrafted rookie like Terrence Davis, random role player like Rondé Hollis Jefferson, a European prospect like Matt Thomas, American playing in Europe, to come in and be this productive. Yeah, they played limited minutes, but in those minutes, the things that they were able to show and the grit that they showed, especially considering the amount of injuries that the Raptors dealt with this season, was extremely impressive. And I think everyone in the league was kind of put on notice, even though it wasn't until recently that people actually started taking them seriously as potential title contenders.
For sure. So not surprising there. Probably just mention really fast too, Giannis winning Defensive Player of the Year. Once again, not a surprise. I think I remember seeing his defensive rating was like 91.
It's insane. Did you see the guy, I think it's the Nets beat writer, that voted Hassan Whiteside and Andre Drummond as his top 2 picks for Defensive Player of the Year? And people were like, dude, you literally just looked at the box score and saw who has the most defensive rebounds. And he was like, no, I actually watched the games, and these guys have way more defensive impact than anyone that you can name. And it's just like, dude, you should not only have your vote as a media member taken away, you should have your right to vote as a citizen of the United States taken away. That's
He can't
ridiculous.
vote for president?
I hope not.
So, okay, future Defensive Player of the Year, Hassan Whiteside, clearly more valuable than Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah, who says no? Just trade him straight up.
You heard that take here on the Away Team podcast.
Yep.
Okay, so let's get into our coaching memoriam segment.
Okay, enough of that shit. All right, let's break this down.
Okay, let's start with Jim Boylen. Not to be confused with Jim Boylen with an A, who was also the coach of the Bulls
Yep.
10 years ago. This is Jim Boylen with an E.
Yeah, both very storied careers, I guess. No, I think Jim Boylen with an E left much more of an imprint on the Bulls organization.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Boylen with an A was a head coach for like 30 games, I think.
That's probably how long Jim Boylen with an E should have been head coach. Maybe less than that, maybe like 3 games. I mean, he was universally loathed, I think is the general consensus on him. He thought he was embracing this like lawful good persona where he could take these ragtag Chicago Bulls players that have never known discipline and mold them into these hardcore basketball robots. Problem was, he was actually chaotic evil. The decisions that he made on the court and off of it were absolutely perplexing. Have you seen some of the timeouts that he's called?
Yeah, I mean, the timeouts have been really stupid. Like, they'll be down by 14 with 20 seconds left, and he calls a timeout. Which, like, I can sort of see as a motivational technique. The problem is like, it's not working because the players don't respect him.
Right.
This guy had such a hard time connecting with his players that his players literally got together and created a leadership council that would talk to management about how crappy Jim Boylen is.
Dude, they mutinied after less than a week of having him as head coach because he was making them practice after back-to-backs.
Yeah.
He's making them, like, run suicides after back-to-backs. It's like, dude, that's evil.
That being said, that team was playing with such a lack of effort and hustle and had so many young players that I can sort of see why he would want to instill a military-esque work ethic in these guys. It just never worked.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to have buy-in in order to create that ethic.
Right, and if you're asking your players to punch in a card like they're a factory worker when they go into practice, like, dude, these guys are millionaires and they aren't going to stand for that shit. Even the 10-day contract guys are going to be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, so, I mean, he at least got that team playing alright defense, 12th in defensive rating, first in steals per game, which isn't always actually a good indicator of teams that are playing good defense. A lot of the times when you're going for steals often, you are giving up very easy plays.
Right.
So there's a give and take there for sure.
I mean, considering that they were 25th in the league in defense the year that he started, where he came in, you know, in the middle of the season, if there was a silver lining to the big, ugly storm cloud that was Jim Boylen roiling the Chicago Bulls, that was it.
Yeah, and they always took efficient shots.
Mm-hmm.
They were one of the top teams in the league in terms of points in the paint and in terms of 3 points attempted. But they didn't go in, obviously.
Right.
So yeah, I think with the Bulls, we decided on Kenny Atkinson as a replacement coach. The team is still very young and has a lack of identity that I think Atkinson would be a good candidate to fix. I also think Atkinson, an underrated part of his coaching technique is getting other guys involved, right? Chicago has an issue with stagnation on offense, where a lot of their offensive sets devolve into Kobe White or Zach LaVine just doing iso ball. And I think with Kenny Atkinson, you're going to see a move away from that sort of play.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's the greatest X's and O's coach of all time, but the fact that he was able to transform, I think, a Brooklyn Nets roster, I think you could argue that it had less talent than the Bulls currently have. I mean,
yeah,
they had like a D'Lo that people had left for dead pretty much after a disappointing first few years. You had like Jared Allen, Joe Harris, like guys that obviously we've seen have a lot of potential to be really great players. But I think at the moment where he started, there wasn't that much faith. I mean, you have Zach LaVine and Lauri Markkanen. I think those two guys have so much potential just in themselves. We'll see if that actually pans out. Zach LaVine is already quite a good player on the offensive end. He's got a lot to learn on the defensive end, of course. But I think that Atkinson could definitely make that team gel a lot better than it has. And I would say their season was bad, but there were some bright spots. There were some developments. Kobe White looks okay. I think he could do a lot with that roster.
I think the biggest thing is Kenny Atkinson's not going to be an asshole.
That too. Well,
yeah.
And also consider that they do have new management coming in.
Yep.
Because they got rid of Garpax or whatever. I think they fired one, demoted the other guy to be an advisor. And they have Karnisovas come in, who I think has... Karnisovas has a much better reputation, I would imagine, and could do a lot with what they have. I think you're going to see some interesting moves from them in the next few months, or we don't know what the season timeline is for next year, but whenever the appropriate time to make moves, I think that they'll be making better ones.
Speaking of making moves, let's move on.
Yeah.
Alvin Gentry, head coach of the New Orleans Pelicans, fired.
Yep. I mean, the performance that they had in the bubble was absolutely pathetic.
It was awful.
It was awful. I mean, they had such a good opportunity to steal that 8th seed, or at least get into the play-in games. I mean, I don't know if you can blame it entirely on Alvin Gentry, but I think when you have a roster that is, I think, relatively deep for such a young team and has a lot of untapped talent, and I mean, you have Drew Holiday, who's an excellent player. You have Brandon Ingram, who's an all-star. You have Zion Williamson. Like, there's really no excuse to be losing 6 of your games when only 2 of them are against teams with positive win-loss ratios, right? They should have done a lot better than they did. I think Alvin Gentry, there were quite a few issues throughout the season. 13-game loss streak, not good. He's been consistently bad on defense for the Pelicans. They've been one of the worst defensive teams in the league pretty much every year since he started coaching for them. And really their offensive numbers, their points per game look really good, but when you regulate it to per 100 possessions, they're not as good as they sound. So I think he was not the answer for them. And with a completely refurbished roster, I think that even though it was kind of a shock to some people to see him go, I think it was the right choice.
Yeah, I think some of the issues that the Pelicans faced in the bubble play were out of his control. You can't control for Lonzo Ball not making any three-pointers ever. Like, the shooting streak that he was on was one of the worst streaks I've ever seen. That being said, it's like you said, the offense was good, but not tops in the league good. And I think that's the only way he keeps his job is if he can put together a top 5 offense, and he just wasn't able to do that.
I think the good thing for the Pelicans is that their assistant staff seems to be really good. Like, their shooting coaches are excellent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, turning Lonzo Ball into a 38% shooter this year was really impressive.
Outside of the bubble, 38%.
That's true. Yeah, big asterisk there. Brandon Ingram also going from being a fairly whatever 3-point shooter to quite good. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think they do have most of the right staff. I do think that Gentry just didn't seem like he ever pieced it together, and motivation seemed to be part of a factor of the seeding game issue. And I think when you see that as a member of the front office, you're like, well, what the hell is he saying?
Right, and the front office, let's keep in mind that the front office just had a big takeover, right, from Dave Griffin,
mm-hmm.
who came in last year before the beginning of the season, right? Really right before the draft. And our thoughts about replacing Gentry are that if Dave Griffin is going to be bringing in a new person, he's probably going to bring in somebody that he has experience with. So we thought maybe Tyronn Lue would be a good fit here. He's one of the few coaches out there that has a championship under his belt. he's a really solid coach in the regard of getting players on the same page. I think he's an underrated offensive coach, amazing defensive coach, like one of the best in the league. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just think he makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, I think he would be a good choice for them. And they have so much talent on that roster that I think what they really need is someone that can bring them all on the same page. Mm-hmm. You know, it just seemed like they were all operating on different cylinders, and JJ Redick was operating in like sixth gear during the thing. He really wanted to get into the playoffs. He didn't want to end his streak, but unfortunately they were out. Another team who had a very disappointing showing in the bubble were the Sixers. And
wait, what?
Surprise, they got rid of Brett Brown. He's off to, I don't know, Margaritaville or something to go spend the rest of his days.
Dude, that guy needs a vacation.
He needs a vacation. He's had a tough time.
The shit he's had to deal with in the last 7 years.
It's insane.
Just take a year off. Go back to Australia. Hang out on the beach.
I mean, it sucks for him, too, because his coaching record is forever tarnished because he had to live through the process.
Yeah, he didn't quite get to coach them during the good times long enough to outweigh that terrible record.
But for good reason, because I think that in terms of adjustments during that series, I mean, clearly the adjustments were lacking. They were just getting torched, and Brad Stevens was just masterminding the Celtics to commanding wins. Like, even in the games where the Sixers were keeping it together, it just seemed like every shot that they made was a Sisyphean struggle, you know?
Yeah, and you would see adjustments that you only make if you have no idea what your team identity is. Like, they started the series with Horford in the starting lineup, and it just didn't work, right? Horford scored like 2 points and was minus 16. And then they put him on the bench, and it's terrible. And then, like, by game, I believe, 4, they were bringing him back into the starting lineup. And it's like, listen, at this point in the season, you've played 70 games.
Yeah.
You should have an idea of what works and doesn't work with your team.
I mean, it's rough that they didn't have Ben Simmons. I think that they would have at least been able to win a game if they had Ben Simmons, despite what the plus-minus numbers say about Simmons and Embiid lineups. I think that he would have done a good job at least slowing down Jason Tatum, who was absolutely on fire. I think that Embiid clearly had emotional issues that Brett Brown was also unable to manage. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a big mark because Embiid's not going to change as a person.
As with Simmons.
Right.
Like, what? I've never seen a coach go to the media and ask them to try to convince a player to take threes. What the hell?
It was weird, man. It was weird. It's time for him to go. Apparently they're going to be shaking up the front office a bit as well. So we'll see what happens there. I think they were running on a consensus-based committee system prior to this, which is really weird. I think Elton Brand is not the answer, but it looks like they're going to stay with him for now. So we'll see what happens. They're kind of fucked in terms of cap situation. They have some terrible contracts that they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do with. But weren't you thinking that Stan Van Gundy would be a good option for them?
Yeah, I thought Stan Van Gundy is a pretty unique and interesting pick to coach the Sixers. Stan Van Gundy, one of the best X's and O's guys that's not currently a head coach. He's also got experience with a team centered around a center. He took the 2009 Magic to the NBA Finals, and people forget that team was really, really good. And it was one of the first teams to really spread the floor for a big man who's the center point of the offense. So I just think Stan Van Gundy has the experience that it would take to coach this veteran team with strange egos and the experience of coaching a similarly structured team.
Absolutely. I mean, I think once they get a new coach, we'll really see whether the limitations were really on Brett Brown or if the roster construction is entirely to blame. I think that there's definitely more that they can get out of that roster. Mm-hmm. I think that just writing it off as this roster is just complete trash. Like, come on, sign some shooters, figure it out. It's not all lost. You have some bad contracts. I don't know. It's a tough situation. I think that a new coach, though, could at least have them win a few games in the first round. I mean, come on.
Yeah, they should have taken a game or two off Boston, even without Simmons.
Speaking of sweeps, Nate MacMillan also got fired recently right after getting extended. It was a very weird situation, but I think they noticed a pattern.
Just a note on that. People are mocking this decision like it had no foresight whatsoever to extend him, which is true. They shouldn't have extended him. But the extension was for 1 extra year on a team option. So it's not like they extended him for 3 years and are eating tons of money. I think it's still a good idea to just admit your mistakes, cut your losses, and fire the guy.
Yeah, I mean, they probably should have waited until after the sweep finished to extend him, or not extend him, or fire him. I mean, the guy went 3-16 in the playoffs with the Pacers.
Yeah.
That's really a terrible playoff record. I think they actually included that information in the Pacers organization, the letter on how much they appreciated everything that Nate MacMillan's done for the organizations. They're like, he had this this many 100 wins, this many losses in the regular season, and 3-16 in the playoffs. So we're letting him go. I mean, yeah.
Just add that in there.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do with this information what you will, but he was also 3-16 in the playoffs.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see a new coach with a more modern offensive scheme come in. The 2-point mid-range thing, as well as it worked for them during the regular season, I think you really did see the issues with it against a team like Miami that has such good 3-point shooters that can just make the lead impossible to catch up on. And the offense was stagnant. It was hard to watch sometimes. Really, you're going to have Malcolm Brogdon just figure out what to do and then just put his head down and drive towards the basket. That's not a winning strategy.
Yeah, and immediately after the firing, Woj tweeted that Mike D'Antoni was being considered as a replacement. And we agree that that would be a good decision.
Yeah.
I think that also speaks to perhaps there were underlying managerial concerns with the roster not shooting threes. That's the only reason you bring D'Antoni in, is to get your guys to shoot more threes and more shots in the paint, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I think we agree with management there that that would be a really good fit, right?
Yeah, I think so. And then you were also saying that the other Van Gundy brother could be a good option for them, but it's up to them.
Yeah, I just think Jeff Van Gundy would be a really good option in terms of having a coach that has had experience coaching a team with solid big men and a lead guard. Keep in mind he was the head coach of Houston during the mid-2000s with Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming. Mm-hmm. Very underrated teams. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the risk with someone like D'Antoni is that he's run systems through uniquely gifted players like Steve Nash and James Harden. The Pacers have a lot of good players, but they don't have anyone, I think, that's at that level. Unless Oladipo comes back and is his former self, but even better.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. They're really more of a sum of their parts team. And I would be really intrigued to see what Mike D'Antoni would do with a team like that.
Yeah.
I think he could do something very unique, Keep in mind, the Suns were a very different team than the Rockets, right? The Suns were fast-breaking, high-paced team, and the Rockets are not really. They're a team that slows it down and runs isolation sets. So I think D'Antoni has more malleability than people give him credit for. It would be interesting to see what he would do with a team that's very different than any other team that he's coached before.
Definitely. So let's just move on to not a coach that got fired, but Vlade Divac, the general manager of the Sacramento Kings, was finally let go. I mean, come on. How long do we have to wait for this? How many mistakes did he make?
What, he was 7 years, 8 years as general manager?
Dude, it was like he was a double agent. He was actively sabotaging the future of the team. Constantly.
I do think he made a couple of trades that were the worst trades I've ever seen. There was the infamous salary dump with Philly, where he just clearly didn't know what the stretch provision was and traded away Nick Stauskas, who, of course now we look at him and say he wasn't good, but this was the year after his rookie year. He was a lottery pick. They trade him, a pick swap, and an unprotected first to get off of $10 million so they can sign Wesley Matthews.
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But he had some other good trades, like trading down in the Marquez Chris draft with Phoenix to get 2 lower first-round picks. He clearly didn't see anything special in Marquez Chris and leveraged the fact that Phoenix did. I thought that was a pretty good move. I think he made a couple of underrated decisions, but for the most part, it was just terrible.
And how do you not pick Luka? You know his dad. Like, the connections are there, and you choose the guy who, like, of course you don't know that Marvin Bagley is going to be that injury prone, but that decision looks worse and worse every single day.
Yeah, and he clearly made a lot of decisions based on, like, feel, when he should have been making these decisions based on analytics. Like, I heard after the Marvin Bagley workout, Marvin Bagley was talking about how much he wanted to come to Sacramento, and that was a big reason why they took him. It's like, you shouldn't be drafting a guy just because he wants to come to your team.
No.
You should be drafting a guy because he's the best player available.
Yeah. Well, what's in the past is in the past. What's done is done. I do want to talk very briefly about the possibility that Luke Walton doesn't see the end of next season. I think that, great coincidence, I think Nate MacMillan would actually be a good coach for the Kings. I think they should look into it. Like, this is a team that hasn't been to the playoffs longer than anyone else. And that's a coach that, at his peak, will get you into the playoffs.
Yeah, he's great at taking teams to the playoff level. He's terrible at taking them beyond that level.
Yeah, I mean, but a first round out, that would be so exciting for Kings fans. I mean, as silly as it sounds, like, if you haven't been to the playoffs in a decade and a half, you know, it would be good.
Yeah. If Vlade Divac was still the GM of the Kings, I think we could very safely say that Jim Boylen would be the next coach, but he's gone.
That's too bad, man. Jim Boylen deserves another opportunity.
And of course I'm talking about Boylen with an A, not an E.
Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. We're on the same page there.
Okay, and the last team, this is kind of controversial, but Houston. Obviously, D'Antoni's still with the team, and there's a very realistic scenario in which D'Antoni comes back and coaches Houston. I mean, what if they win the championship? We talked about that scenario off record. But, you know, as is, I think the chances of D'Antoni returning are very slim. There's been a lot of turmoil. The owner of Houston, Tillman Fertitta, has been very vocal about not wanting to pay coaches a lot of money. He's clearly very cheap. So, who would replace Houston?
Well, we were saying our boy Dave Yerger.
Dave!
Yeah, he needs another shot. I mean, what he did with that Sacramento team was extremely impressive. And then to get fired after that and replaced with just stale fucking bread coach like Luke Walton. You know, I understand that Dave Yerger is a bit of an asshole, but the guy has a great mind for the game. And if you can look past that, you know, I don't know how sensitive Harden is. I think he's actually a pretty sensitive guy. But in terms of just like, let's ignore all that personality stuff and let's just think about the game of basketball in hard facts, he would be a great coach for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the underrated qualities with Dave Yerger, too, is that he has coached very different stylistic teams and had success. In Memphis, he coached a very slow, methodical team with veterans, brought them to the playoffs in multiple seasons. And then he came to Sacramento, right? And had pretty much the opposite sort of team. Not defensively minded, young, athletic, and almost brought that team to the playoffs. Well, not really. But they were the ninth seed that year.
But they were down by 9 games from the 8th seed.
Yeah, but there were times during the year where they were competing for 8th seed position. It kind of fell apart at the end of the year, but I think you would still consider that Sacramento team a success story in terms of increase in wins compared to the prior season. So what I say all this just to say that he has the ability to change. And if there's one team in the league that is interested in taking unique approaches, it is Houston. And Dave Yerger might be the guy that could provide that approach.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to see him on the sideline again. Like, I don't care, bring him back as an assistant, but the guy is, like, too good at coaching basketball to, like, not have a job right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess he's alienated everyone because he's such an asshole, but if you can handle it.
I kind of respect how much of a dick he is, too.
Yeah.
You know?
Sometimes you gotta be a dick. And he's a dick not in the Jim Boylen way where there's, like, no basis for being such an asshole. Like, he knows that he's right when he's making a point of being a dickbag.
Yeah, and I think it's important to state, too, I never hear players talk about how bad he was.
Mm-hmm.
I only ever hear management people. So I think that's important, too. It's not like he's ostracized players.
I mean,
and other coaches love him.
Right.
Like, Eric Spoelstra and Doc Rivers both agreed that he's one of the best X's and O's guys in the league.
I do think that the Sacramento, the kids on the roster, were, like, not sad to see him go. I'm pretty sure I read that. But there's a difference between that and, like, actively hating the guy. And, like, if you're winning feels good. And if your coach is going to be an asshole to you, then if he makes you win, then whatever. Who cares? You're winning.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's all for now, I think. We might see some more coaching mix-ups in the future. I don't know.
Should we end with a little more Titanic song?
Yeah, as long as we don't get copyright struck. All right, away team out.
Away team out.